Hey everyone, it's Mark. Welcome to Onyx Training Table. And I'm going to do a little series that I'm going to start to call Things to Consider. And excuse me, excuse me, sorry. And what I want to, as we're coming into the end of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, for the killings that occurred in Kenosha, Wisconsin during the protests last year, I want to just talk about a couple things to consider. Okay. Now, first off, this isn't a debate. This isn't an argument or anything like that. If you want to post comments about your beliefs in it, that's fine. You can have them. Just don't be argumentative. This is not an argument. These are things for you to consider in light of what's being presented in the court trial and how this trial could impact use of force for people in the future. You know, we often don't realize that court cases don't just impact that immediate or that specific event, but they can have far-reaching impact on our daily lives into the future forever. So just a couple things for us to consider in light of what's going on in the Rittenhouse trial. First things to consider is this: he was there illegally. Okay, he was there illegally. There's no other way to get around it. He was 17 years old, in possession of a firearm. He had crossed state lines with it to go to this place. He was not protecting his house. He was not protecting his property. He went across to another state armed with a weapon in order to, as he said, protect people's property and also to give first aid. We'll talk about that in a second. But we have to start there at the beginning, is that how did he get to that scene? How did he get into that situation? A lot of times we talk about use of force, especially in law enforcement use of force, and you'll see it in district attorneys' statements when they justify the use of force. They'll say, in that moment, the use of force was justified. And that may be true because there are a wide latitude for the justification use of force, especially for law enforcement in a law enforcement situation, and fear of your life and all that kind of stuff. But what we really need to do is we need to look at the totality of the situation and say, you know, what's the whole situation look like? And to start it off, Kyle Rittenhouse was in that location, in that situation, illegally. So he committed a crime just by being there. He committed a crime to get there, all right? So if we're gonna talk about criminality and legality, we have to start there and realize that he was committing a crime. And I've heard people say, well, the rioters and the looters and whatever. So remember that there were protesters there are rioters, and there are looters. They're different groups. They're not the same group. Protest is legal. Okay, we have to remember that. Being a protester is legal. So then that would have to determine what position those other men occupied at the time of their interaction with Rittenhouse. Because Kyle Rittenhouse was already illegal. He was already a criminal when he interacted with those three men. And so we have to realize that, were those three men, did they have legal standing? Were they protesting? You know, people say, well, the one guy was pushing a dumpster fire. Okay, all right, so we can say he was illegal. The point being is that if you're gonna say that they were there illegally, you have to also accept and acknowledge that Rittenhouse was there illegally, okay? So yeah, of course, none of them should have been there. All right, that's fine. But we need to put the only person on trial is Kyle Rittenhouse. So we have to look at where his legal standing was or is in that time, in the time of that event. So think about that. If he had been law-abiding, as he claimed to be and as everybody claims to be, that he was a law-abiding citizen, he wouldn't have even been there, right? Or he wouldn't have inserted himself into that problem the way he did. And I say that because he had a rifle with him, so he felt more confident to defend himself. So he is going to insert himself into situations that, had he not been armed with a weapon, he would not have done, okay? and should not have done. He claimed he went there to provide first aid if necessary, and that's fine. He had a first aid pack with him. I'm going to go with that. Apparently, in the moment, he also decided to act as a firefighter and took a fire extinguisher where he saw a fire, and they ended up at that dumpster fire when he got into confrontation with those three men. He also claimed he was protecting other people's properties. Okay, so that's the thing is, let's think about that. He was protecting other people's strangers who he didn't know, who he had never had any contact with. He was just going there to protect their property. So remember, he was not authorized to do so, right? No, and they said in the trial that the owner of the property never told him to come to protect his property. So he was not authorized. He was also not qualified to do so. So we can, what is his formal understanding of use of force? When he can use force? Is it in defense of property? Is it in defense of a person? What kind of threat has to be projected to him? All that kind of stuff. So he's inserting himself into this position in a role that he is not authorized to occupy, nor is he qualified to occupy. Okay, he's not law enforcement. He's not a first responder. Sure, he's in class. That's great. He's not a first responder. He's not a qualified first responder, certified, test taken, all that kind of stuff. He wasn't even an adult by definition of our society at the time this happened. He was still a child taking on this role. So he took it on himself. Nobody gave it to him through any certification. Nobody gave it to him through any authorization. He just took that on himself. So we have to understand where his standing is by just taking that on himself and saying, I'm going to do this, right? With nobody else even saying, come protect my stuff. Remember this, protecting property by lethal force without authority and or illegally is vigilantism. We, in our society, do not encourage vigilantism because it goes counter to our law enforcement and our judicial system, right? And our criminal justice system. So remember that, is that when people start to take, because that's what he did, he essentially took the law into his own hands and says, I'm going to go there and occupy this role that again, was not qualified nor authorized to do. His self-defense claim, and this is a big one, opens up a lot of issues for the future. So let's think about this. This sets a precedent, right? Legal precedent that if he can claim self-defense in a situation where he has no legal standing to be, we have to look at what that can do for future situations, okay? And I say it like this. Now, a burglar enters your house, not supposed to be there, okay? Is moving through your house, you confront them, you threaten to kill them. I'm going to kill you for being in my house, okay? Now, we can say stand your ground, make my day rule, whatever rules like that can apply. However, this now can set a precedent that somebody who is in a place with no legal standing can claim self-defense, they use force. So now let's go to that trespasser or burglar comes into your house, or let's do it, make it, because the house is easy. Your place of business, it's after hours, nobody's supposed to be there. So there's nobody to protect. Somebody goes in to burglarize, you get there on the alarm and you show up and you walk in and the person's already coming out and you say, hey, stop, I'm gonna kill you if you don't stop. And they shoot and wound you or shoot and kill you. Now, do they have, people say, well, of course they can't because they were burglarizing the place. Well, no, they had no legal, let's just go to the basic. They had no legal standing to be there. They were committing a crime being there. Same as Kyle Rittenhouse, no legal standing to be there, committing a crime being there. Now, not using force against or anything like that even. And you threaten to use force against them and they use force against you and claim self-defense. This case is opening up that precedent, could create that precedent that a person can claim self-defense even though they're in a spot where they are not supposed to be legally. And these are things we need to think about as we're looking at this, because I'll close this with the biggest issue in this is that, again, we're trying to talk about this case in a moment, right? We're saying, oh, he committed self-defense because the dude was running at him. The guy was running at him. Self-defense because they threatened him. The guy had a gun. Well, the guy who had a gun who got injured claimed that he thought Kyle Rittenhouse was an active shooter. And so he was coming to stop what he believed to be somebody committing a crime, who really, that person was committing a crime. He wasn't shooting people, but just by him being there, possessing that rifle, he was committing a crime. So he was actually contacting a criminal. But that's the whole point, is that some people are trying to look at this only in that, you know, I've heard the defense is trying to say focus on 3 minutes. You know, as Kyle Rittenhouse shows up, gets into a confrontation with them, then gets chased and then shoots. We have to look at this in the totality. And this is where I think that we fail in the criminal justice system and law enforcement in shootings, is that we say, okay, in that moment, but we don't talk about how those officers got to that moment, all right? Like, you know, recently in Philadelphia, where police officers were shot at a football game, and they shot back at the suspects, and they ended up hitting and striking 4 out of 5 people shot in that incident and killing an 8-year-old girl. And now people say, well, the police are not going to face any charges, and their shooting was justified because they were shot at. But we have to look at the whole thing. How can their shooting be justified when we have all these rules and policies in place and tactical decision-making concepts and principles that would say that a police officer can't just shoot at somebody in a crowded space? If you think about it, several officers shot, and the only people they hit and struck with their bullets were innocent bystanders. That's a problem. You can't, how is that justified based on our decision-making criteria? This is the same thing. We can't look at that moment, oh, because the suspect shot at the police, so the police were then justified in shooting him. No, are the police justified in shooting him based on everything that we train, everything that we put into policing as far as policies, firearm safety rules, all those things? Are they justified based on all that? Now, the DA is never, ever going to rule on that because that's not their position. They don't have that understanding. But as far as law enforcement goes, we need to be looking at that. And so as we're looking at this case, for the public to see, is that we need to look at the totality of the circumstance and how did it come about? Kyle Rittenhouse didn't just suddenly appear on that street in front of those guys. He had to get there. How did he get there? How was it for him to get here? So he committed crimes to get there. So we can look at this as the fruits of the poisonous tree. He committed a crime to be there and get there. So now everything that he does, he doesn't gain legal standing back because he's still committing a crime. So we have to really change the way that we look at things and say, okay, let's think about this from the beginning to the point where the use of force of the event happened. All right, so just some things to consider. Again, I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to don't contact me and say, you know, I don't know anything that I'm talking about. So I've got 30 years in law enforcement. So yeah, I do have some understanding of this. I'm not talking about rocket science, and I'm not talking about cooking. I'm talking about policing, and I'm talking about use of force, okay? So I do have an understanding about that. You can say all you want to say about the property criminals over there doing whatever. My point being is that Kyle Rittenhouse was also committing a crime just being there. So if you're going to say the other people were committing a crime and shouldn't have been there, then you also have to acknowledge that Rittenhouse was committing a crime and shouldn't have been there. All right, so hopefully this maybe gives you some food for thought. I hope so, because it did for me. Because I think we want to be this tribal factionalism, and no matter what, we want to look at it one way or the other, and we need to come back to the middle and look at it from the middle of the road, not from one ditch or the other ditch. Okay, So, hey, this could be a huge event in this country as far as use of force, self-defense, all that kind of stuff. That could have ramifications far into the future. So you need to be looking at this, and you need to be questioning what makes sense in this. All right. Hey, thanks a lot for tuning in. This is Mark, and thanks for tuning into Onyx Training Table.